Is there a national shortage of CDL drivers? What's going on with the freight industry? It seems like the spot market is rapidly declining, but at the same time, the cost of diesel has gone up by $2. In this video, I have a 30-minute consultation with a fellow box truck business owner thinking about making the transition to a semi-truck. I answer all of his questions. If you have questions, if you want to talk, the link is in the description. Schedule a consultation with me. I'll answer all of your questions. Hopefully you learned something from this video. I hope you enjoy.
Don't wanna sleep in, cause I got something to prove. I gotta take what I hate and finally make a move. I think of you and...
Hey, this is Zach Pasquarello. I'm good, how are you? Is now still a good time to talk? Perfect. So what do you have going on? So you already have a box truck, you've been running it, but you're thinking about switching to a semi. I really think there's a lot more profit with the semi. I mean, you already know, you've been running a box truck for how long? What, a year? 2 years? Okay, so about half a year. So you were going over the road with a box truck, but now you're doing local stuff. I agree, first of all. I don't think box trucks were necessarily meant to go over the road. I feel like box truck business owners kind of like made this up in the past few years. I think they're better off running locally, but I mean, I agree, there's not as much money running locally with a box truck. And it's a lot harder work. I mean, I'm sure you guys are installing appliances and that's not easy. So there are 3 or 4 things that really scared me from starting with a semi, and they were the big reason why I didn't even do it in the first place. Fast forward 6 months, I did it all in February, and I'm kicking myself because it was nowhere near as scary, intimidating, difficult, complicated as I thought it would be. And those 4 things, I'm sure you've done your research, I'm sure you already know: IRP plates, heavy vehicle use tax, IFTA, and the consortium. Those are the only 4 differences between driving a semi and driving a non-CDL box truck. First of all, the heavy vehicle use tax is insanely simple. You can go to any website and you can do, it's called a 2290 with the IRS, and you just fill it out once a year. It's like $500, incredibly simple. Your IRP, your apportioned plates, it's just like registering your truck. You can do that at your Department of Transportation. Actually, the dealership where I bought my semi truck, they did it for me. So they hooked me up with my apportioned plates. And IFTA is also incredibly simple. All you need to know how many gallons of fuel you bought in what state and how many miles you drove in what state. And if you're using a fuel card, that'll tell you that. And obviously you're using an electronic logging device, and so that'll tell you where you drove. So IFTA is incredibly simple. The last thing is the consortium for drug tests. And I would recommend get hooked up with a compliance agency, if you haven't already, for the CDL tractor. They will help you out with the consortium. You might be able to do it on your own, but I would pay a couple $100 to a compliance agency, and they will help you out with the drug testing consortium. And then finally, obviously the biggest challenge is hiring a driver. That was like, the paperwork is one thing, but finding a qualified, reliable CDL driver is definitely more difficult than finding a box truck driver, because you can take any kid off the street and throw him in a box truck, but you need a qualified driver to drive a CDL. And in today's market, I just read an article yesterday, Walmart is offering $110,000 a year to drive tractors, which is crazy. I mean, we can't compete with that. So in February, I reached out to a staffing agency, and most staffing agencies specialize, warehouse work, nurses, truck drivers, like most of them specialize. So I found CDL driver staffing agency, and luckily it was local, right in my hometown. I don't know where you live, but I'm sure you have a CDL staffing agency close by, and they got me a driver in 2 weeks. So all 5 of my problems were solved in the first month that I tried, and it just, I don't know, it seems a lot more complicated. It seems a lot more intimidating when you get started, but once you start doing things and reach out to your staffing agency, compliance agency, DOT, it's not as hard as you think. Especially, you already have 6 months of DOT and box truck experience, so it'll be a very easy transition for you. It's so much easier to find loads. You have a sleeper cab, so you're not paying for a hotel. and tractors are meant to go over the road. And what I found, I mean, I've only been running my tractor for 3 months, but I seriously, I don't think maintenance is all that much more in a tractor than it is in a box truck, because I mean, they're both large diesel engines. I mean, maybe if you have a trailer, you know, there might be more maintenance with a trailer, but there's no engine obviously in a trailer. So like, you know, you puncture a hole in the wall of a trailer, that's it. But that could also happen in the 26-foot box on your box truck. So I really don't think maintenance is any higher. But I mean, I don't know what kind of rate per mile you were getting in your box truck, but like I'm lucky if I'm getting $2.25 a mile in my box truck. So we were struggling. We were running about 2,000 miles a week, maybe 2,500 miles a week on a good week, and we were getting right around $2 a mile. But once you throw in deadhead, I mean, we were struggling to get over $4,000 of revenue per week. But with the semi truck, man, the loads are everywhere. The loads are paying good. It's easy to find. It's easy to dispatch. Having a semi truck is 1,000 times easier as long as you can find a driver. Yeah, I just did a quick Google search and I reached out to all of the local staffing agencies. And I also reached out to the national staffing agencies, but they weren't really any help. But the one that I work with in Pennsylvania, I have a buddy who has a truck in Indiana, and my staffing agency in Pennsylvania was able to find him a driver. So they do work nationally. So if you want, I have your email address. After this call, I can send you their information. You can reach out to them, and they can see if they can help you find a driver. But I mean, they've been pretty good for him and me, and they also work with Penske and other large companies. They do staffing for other trucking companies, so they're pretty good at what they do. I wouldn't even waste your time with Indeed. I made a job post. I mean, I know you can pay for advertising on Indeed. I didn't pay for a job posting, but I posted my job on Indeed, and I advertised it at like 65 cents per mile, which is right around, it's a little bit above industry standard. Industry standard is like 58 to 60 cents a mile from what I've heard, and I didn't get a single application. It was up there for 30 days. So, I mean, maybe you could try throwing a couple $100 at your Indeed application. It might be worth a shot. The only thing I would say about the staffing agency, they find you a driver, but it's going to cost you. So they upcharge 58%. So keep in mind, though, they cover payroll, they cover workers' comp insurance, and they provide health insurance. So there's some out-of-pocket expenses you don't have to cover. But as you know, payroll tax is only 7%. Workers' comp insurance is only about 5% of wages. And I don't know how much it costs to put an employee up on health insurance. So really, from tax and insurance, you're paying out-of-pocket 12% of their wages. So 58 minus 12, so you're paying close to like 40% of an upcharge just in the staffing fee alone. So, you know, I'm paying my driver 58 cents per mile, and then whenever you add 58% to that, it comes out to be right around $1 a mile that I'm paying for my driver. But I'm still able to be profitable, and without that staffing agency, I would not have a driver. So I'd rather pay for an expensive driver than not have a driver at all. And after 6 months, they can come work for you for free. You can buy them out of their contract before then, but after 6 months, their contract automatically expires and they can just come work for you. Keep in mind, the type of people, and nothing against anybody, but just keep this in mind from a business owner perspective, the type of people who reach out to a staffing agency to try to find a job are probably the type of people that, you know, might hop between jobs, might struggle to find a job, might be really impatient, might be looking for a quick job, transition between jobs. So just keep in mind, you know, if you hire someone through a staffing agency, don't be surprised if they leave. Don't be surprised if they're a difficult employee. You just never know who you're hiring whenever you go through a staffing agency. I actually just found out yesterday that my driver wants to quit. So he was my driver for 2 months. He was great, but you know, just didn't work out for him. So he just told me yesterday that he wants to leave. So I reached back out to my staffing agency, and they're going to try to find me another driver. You know, we'll see what happens. But the recruiters there told me the turnover rate is 150% for truck drivers, CDL truck drivers nationwide. So over the course of 1 year, for example, if you had to hire 100 drivers, if you needed to have 100 drivers, you would need to hire 150 drivers every year just to sustain 100 drivers. So it's just the industry, man. Like, it's worse than warehouse workers. Like, the turnover rate for CDL drivers is just, it's crazy. And that's why places like Walmart are offering to pay $110,000 to CDL drivers because everyone's desperate to keep their drivers. Yeah, I don't know who you have driving your box truck right now. I got my brother driving my box truck, and it's pretty underrated having a reliable, consistent driver. Like, that will make or break your business, having drivers or not having drivers. It's the hardest part. You can buy trucks all day, you can find loans all day, you can find loads all day, but it is tough to find good, reliable drivers. That's a good question. So my driver, how long does he stay out? It all depends. Originally, it was Monday through Friday and home every weekend. And then I was kind of looking at the numbers and I was wondering, kind of like you are, would it be beneficial to have him stay out, 2 to 3 weeks? Because then he could go all over the country, maybe a California run. The only issue with staying out over the weekend is that he'll be living in the truck, obviously, over the weekend, and, turning the truck on more, idling the truck more, not idling the truck all weekend, but the truck does require a lot of fuel when it idles. So it's really not that much more difficult to bring your driver home every weekend. I don't know. I don't really know the cost analysis difference between home every weekend and out for 3 weeks, but the big thing is just looking at your fuel consumption on the weekend. And the really cool thing is, do you have the Keep Truckin' ELD? So I don't know if you've ever looked, but they actually have like your fuel consumption and your idle fuel consumption data straight through your Keep Truckin' ELD. So if you've never looked at that, I definitely recommend. You can see how much fuel your trucks consume while they're driving and while they're idling. So there's some really good data for you. But my driver, like I said, it's a lot easier to find semi-truck loads, so it's not very challenging to find a load to bring him back home. Especially, if you're in Atlanta, obviously, there's a bunch of loads in Atlanta. So yeah, I mean, he could be out for 2 to 3 weeks, but a lot of drivers like to come home on the weekend. So if you could find someone willing to be out 3 weeks, keep him in the Midwest, that might be beneficial. But I wouldn't worry too much about, oh, you want to come home every weekend? Sorry, no. I would, if they're willing to come home every weekend, I would still hire them. Man, I did the same thing, dedicated freight from brokers, and I was not happy with the rates that I was getting. Yeah, it's dedicated, it's consistent, but the spot market's always going to be better than dedicated freight from brokers. Now, if you can get dedicated freight from shippers, that's a completely different story. Obviously, getting, freight directly from the shipper is great, but in my experience, dedicated freight from brokers, they are trying to lowball you pretty significantly because it's dedicated, so you don't have to worry about finding freight. But I was getting seriously $2.50 a mile for dedicated semi-truck freight. That's just my experience. Maybe you'll have better luck negotiating with the brokers, but I don't know. I hope you do, but I did not find any good dedicated freight from brokers. I'm sure it's out there, but yeah, no one's gonna come knocking on your door saying, "Hey, I got this load for $3.50. Can you please run it every day?" I mean, because everyone would be taking that, supply and demand. I mean, that would be eaten up alive on the load boards. Brokers are trying to find stuff for $2.50, not $3.50. So a truck can live up to about 1 million miles. And if you think, let's do some quick math real quick. Let's assume you drive 3,000 miles every week, 50 weeks out of the year, that's 150,000 miles. Me personally, if I were buying a truck, I would want it to last me 3 years. So if you get a truck with 500,000 miles on it and you put 150,000 every year, after 3 years, the truck will have 950,000 miles. That'll be a good time to sell it. So I think anything close to 500,000 is probably good. I bought my truck with 550, a 2016 International Pro Star, 550,000 miles, for $65,000, and that's kind of like the oldest and the most miles that I would ever consider buying a truck for. Right now, if you're looking at buying a 2018 with 400,000 miles on it, you're probably going to spend $95,000 to $110,000. And the best place to look is truckpaper.com.